The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of San Miguel de Allende, a picturesque town in central Mexico known for its colonial architecture and vibrant art scene. Amidst the bustling marketplace, a slender figure in a worn-out dress moved gracefully between the stalls, her long black hair cascading down her back in a simple braid. This was Maria Esperanza, a 25-year-old woman whose beauty was matched only by her kindness and humility. Maria's dark eyes, filled with a mixture of determination and weariness, scanned the produce laid out before her. With trembling hands, she counted the few pesos she had managed to save, carefully selecting the ripest tomatoes and the freshest cilantro she could afford. As the daughter of a poor farmer, every centavo was precious, and she knew she had to make the most of what little she had. Little did Maria know that her life was about to change dramatically, for better and for worse. As she made her way through the crowded market, a commotion near the town square caught her attention. A sleek black limousine had pulled up in front of the Grand Castillo mansion, home to the wealthiest family in San Miguel de Allende. The driver rushed to open the door, and out stepped Alejandro Castillo, the dashing heir to the Castillo fortune. Alejandro's piercing green eyes swept across the crowd, and for a brief moment, they locked with Maria's. Time seemed to stand still as an inexplicable connection formed between them. Maria felt her heart skip a beat, and a faint blush crept across her cheeks. Alejandro, too, found himself captivated by the humble beauty before him. But their moment was shattered by a shrill voice that cut through the air like a knife. "Alejandro! What are you doing, staring at that dirty peasant girl?" The voice belonged to Isabella Castillo, Alejandro's mother and the formidable matriarch of the Castillo family. Her face was contorted with disgust as she glared at Maria. Maria's cheeks burned with shame as she quickly lowered her gaze and tried to disappear into the crowd. But Isabella was not done with her public humiliation. "You there, girl," she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. "Come here at once." With trembling legs, Maria approached the imposing woman. "Yes, Señora," she said softly, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. Isabella's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I need someone to carry my bags. You look strong enough, despite your pathetic appearance. I'll pay you a few pesos for your trouble." Before Maria could respond, Alejandro stepped forward. "Mother, please. There's no need for—" "Silence, Alejandro," Isabella snapped. This girl should be grateful for the opportunity to serve her betters. "Now, girl, what's your name?" "Maria Esperanza, Señora," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella's eyes narrowed. "Esperanza? Hope?" She let out a mocking laugh. "What a ridiculous name for someone in your position. Well, Hope, pick up these bags and follow me. And don't you dare look at my son again, or I'll make sure you regret it." As Maria struggled with the heavy shopping bags, following the Castillos into the exclusive boutiques that lined the square, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her circumstances crushing down upon her. Yet, even in this moment of humiliation, a tiny spark of defiance flickered in her heart. She may be poor, but she had her dignity, and no one could take that away from her. Little did Maria know that her encounter with the Castillo family was just the beginning of a tumultuous journey that would test her resilience, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead her to discover a truth that would shake the foundations of San Miguel de Allende's high society. As the day wore on, Maria found herself subjected to a barrage of insults and degrading tasks at the hands of Isabella Castillo. The wealthy woman seemed to take a perverse pleasure in belittling Maria at every turn, forcing her to try on expensive dresses only to mock her appearance, and making her clean up spills that Isabella herself had accidentally caused. Through it all, Alejandro watched with a mixture of shame and admiration. He was mortified by his mother's behavior, yet impressed by the quiet dignity with which Maria bore her mistreatment. Several times, he tried to intervene, only to be silenced by his mother's withering glare. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the cobblestone streets, Isabella finally dismissed Maria with a wave of her bejeweled hand. "That's enough for today, girl. Here's your payment." She tossed a few coins at Maria's feet, smirking as they scattered across the pavement. Maria knelt to gather the coins, her cheeks burning with humiliation. As she reached for the last peso, a strong, tanned hand beat her to it. She looked up to find Alejandro crouching beside her, his green eyes filled with concern and something else, a warmth that made her heart flutter despite her best efforts to quell it. "I apologize for my mother's behavior," Alejandro said softly, pressing the coin into Maria's palm and closing her fingers around it. "You didn't deserve any of that." For a moment, Maria allowed herself to be lost in his gaze. But reality came crashing back as Isabella's voice shattered the moment once again. "Alejandro! Get away from that filthy girl this instant." Maria quickly stepped back, clutching her meager earnings to her chest. "Gracias, señor," she murmured, before turning and hurrying away, her heart pounding and her mind reeling from the day's events. As she made her way home through the winding streets, the weight of her encounters with the Castillo family settled heavily upon her shoulders. Yet, even in her distress, she couldn't help but think of the kindness in Alejandro's eyes, so at odds with his mother's cruelty. Maria's tiny home on the outskirts of town was a far cry from the opulent Castillo mansion, but it was filled with love and warmth. As she pushed open the creaky wooden door, the familiar scent of her father's favorite stew greeted her, momentarily chasing away the lingering sting of the day's humiliations. "Papa, I'm home," she called out, forcing a smile onto her face. She didn't want to worry her father, who had enough troubles of his own. Rafael Esperanza emerged from the small kitchen, wiping his hands on a tattered apron. His weathered face broke into a wide smile at the sight of his daughter, but it quickly faded as he noticed the redness around her eyes and the slump of her shoulders. "Mi hija, what's wrong?" he asked, concern etching deep lines into his forehead. "Did something happen at the market?" Maria hesitated, not wanting to burden her father with her problems. But as she looked into his loving eyes, the floodgates opened, and she found herself pouring out the entire story of her encounter with the Castillos. Rafael listened patiently, his expression darkening with each word. When Maria finished, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Oh, my sweet Maria," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You are worth 1,000 Isabellas. Don't let her cruel words poison your beautiful heart." As Maria clung to her father, drawing strength from his unwavering love, she had no idea that across town, in the opulent Castillo mansion, a heated argument was taking place, one that would set in motion a chain of events that would change her life forever. In the luxurious study of the Castillo home, Alejandro paced back and forth, his handsome face contorted with anger. "Mother, how could you treat that poor girl so horribly?" he demanded, his voice rising with each word. "She did nothing to deserve such cruelty." Isabella Castillo reclined in a plush leather chair, swirling a glass of expensive red wine. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows arched in amusement at her son's outburst. "Oh, Alejandro," she sighed, her tone dripping with condescension. "When will you learn? People like that girl, what was her name? Maria, they're beneath us. They exist to serve, nothing more." Alejandro slammed his fist on the antique mahogany desk, causing the crystal decanter to rattle. "That's nonsense, and you know it. Maria is a human being, deserving of respect and dignity. I won't stand by and watch you mistreat people simply because they weren't born into wealth." A dark shadow passed over Isabella's face, and she set down her wine glass with deliberate slowness. "You would do well to remember your place, my son," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "The Castillo name carries weight in this town, and with that comes certain expectations. I won't have you jeopardizing our family's standing by associating with common street trash." "She's not trash!" Alejandro shouted, his green eyes flashing with fury. And I don't care about our family's standing if it means treating people like they're less than human." Isabella rose from her chair, her elegant figure suddenly imposing. "Enough," she hissed. "You will cease this foolish infatuation with that girl immediately. I forbid you from seeing her or speaking to her again. Do I make myself clear?" Alejandro met his mother's gaze, his jaw set in defiance. "Crystal clear, mother," he said coldly. "But know this, I am my own man, and I will make my own decisions. Your cruelty and prejudice have no place in my life." With that, he stormed out of the study, leaving Isabella seething in his wake. As the door slammed behind him, she picked up her wine glass and hurled it at the wall, watching with satisfaction as it shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. "You ungrateful boy," she muttered, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You have no idea of the lengths I've gone to protect this family. And I won't let some peasant girl ruin everything I've worked for." As Isabella began to plot her next move, determined to keep Alejandro and Maria apart at any cost, she had no inkling of the earth-shattering secret that lay buried in the past, a secret that, once revealed, would turn her world upside down and force her to confront the consequences of her lifelong cruelty. Meanwhile, in her humble home, Maria tossed and turned on her thin mattress, unable to shake the memory of Alejandro's kind eyes and gentle touch. She knew it was foolish to even entertain the thought of him. They came from different worlds, separated by an unbridgeable chasm of wealth and social status. And yet, as she drifted off into an uneasy sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to her story than she knew. Little did Maria realize that her life was about to become entangled in a web of secrets, lies, and long-buried truths that would shake the very foundations of San Miguel de Allende. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, fate was already setting in motion a series of events that would test her strength, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead her to a destiny beyond her wildest dreams. The stage was set for a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption that would captivate the entire town and reveal that sometimes, the humblest of beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary of endings. The following morning dawned bright and clear over San Miguel de Allende, but for Maria Esperanza, it felt as though a dark cloud hung over her head. As she made her way to the bustling marketplace where she sold hand-woven blankets to help support her father, she couldn't shake the memory of yesterday's humiliation at the hands of Isabella Castillo. Worse still, the kindness in Alejandro's eyes haunted her dreams, a tantalizing glimpse of a world she could never be part of. Little did Maria know that across town, in the opulent Castillo mansion, events were unfolding that would soon draw her into a whirlwind of secrets, lies, and unexpected alliances. Alejandro Castillo paced the length of his bedroom, his handsome face creased with worry. He couldn't get the image of Maria out of his mind, her quiet dignity in the face of his mother's cruelty, the depth of emotion in her dark eyes. He knew he had to see her again, to make things right somehow. But how could he do so without incurring his mother's wrath? A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, expecting to see one of the household staff. To his surprise, it was his father, Eduardo Castillo, who entered the room. Eduardo was a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the same piercing green eyes as his son. Unlike his wife, Isabella, Eduardo was known for his quiet kindness and fair business practices. He looked at Alejandro with concern etched on his face. "Son," he began, closing the door behind him, "I couldn't help but overhear your argument with your mother last night. This girl, Maria, she means something to you, doesn't she?" Alejandro sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "I barely know her, father. But there's something about her, a strength, a goodness that I've never seen before. And the way mother treated her, it was unconscionable." Eduardo nodded slowly, a strange expression flickering across his face. "Your mother, she hasn't always been this way, you know. There was a time when she understood the value of kindness, of treating all people with respect." Alejandro snorted in disbelief. I find that hard to believe. His father's eyes grew distant, as if looking into the past. It's true. But something happened, many years ago, that changed her. Hardened her heart. He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal conflict. Alejandro, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you long ago. But before Eduardo could continue, the door burst open, and Isabella swept into the room like a storm cloud. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene before her. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a knife's edge. Eduardo straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Nothing, my dear. I was just having a chat with our son." Isabella's gaze darted between her husband and son, suspicion clear in her eyes. "I see. Well, I hate to interrupt, but we have important matters to discuss, Eduardo. The charity gala is tonight, and there are last-minute details to attend to." As his parents left the room, Alejandro couldn't shake the feeling that his father had been about to reveal something of great importance. But what could it be? And how did it relate to Maria and his mother's inexplicable cruelty? Meanwhile, in the heart of the marketplace, Maria carefully arranged her colorful blankets on a worn wooden table. The morning sun glinted off the intricate patterns she had painstakingly woven, each one a testament to her skill and dedication. As she worked, she overheard snatches of conversation from nearby vendors and customers. "Did you hear about the Castillo charity gala tonight?" one woman whispered excitedly to her friend. "They say all the most important people in town will be there." "Oh yes," her companion replied, "and I heard they're short-staffed. Apparently, half the catering team came down with food poisoning." Maria's ears perked up at this. She had experience serving at parties. It was how she had earned extra money during the tourist season. Perhaps this could be an opportunity to make some much-needed cash for her father's medicine. Gathering her courage, Maria approached the gossiping women. "Excuse me, senoras," she said politely, "but did I hear you say the Castillos need staff for their gala tonight?" The women looked at her with a mixture of surprise and disdain, taking in her simple dress and work-worn hands. "Yes," one of them said slowly, "but I doubt they'd hire someone someone not used to such grand affairs." Maria lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "I have experience serving at fine parties," she said firmly. "Could you tell me who I might speak to about the position?" Impressed by her determination, the kinder of the two women softened. "You could try speaking to Donna Elena at the employment agency near the square. But hurry, I'm sure many people will be after the job." Thanking the women, Maria quickly packed up her blankets and rushed towards the square. Her heart pounded with a mixture of hope and trepidation. If she could secure this job, it would mean much-needed money for her family. But it would also mean facing the Castillos again, including the formidable Isabella. As Maria hurried through the winding streets, she was so focused on her goal that she didn't notice the figure stepping out of a shadowy alleyway until she collided with him. Strong hands steadied her, preventing her from falling. She looked up, an apology on her lips, only to find herself staring into the startlingly green eyes of Alejandro Castillo. "Maria," he exclaimed, surprise and pleasure mingling in his voice. "I was hoping to find you. I wanted to apologize again for my mother's behavior yesterday. It was unforgivable." Maria's cheeks flushed, her heart racing at his proximity. "There's no need to apologize, senor," she murmured, taking a step back. "You're not responsible for your mother's actions." Alejandro's expression grew serious. "Perhaps not, but I feel responsible for making it right. Please, let me help you somehow. My family's wealth and influence, surely there must be something I can do." For a moment, Maria was tempted. How easy it would be to accept his offer, to allow this handsome, kind man to sweep in and solve all her problems. But her pride and innate sense of justice rebelled against the idea. "Thank you, Señor Castillo, but I don't need charity," she said firmly. "I'm on my way to apply for a job at your family's gala tonight. If you truly want to help, you can put in a good word for me with the employment agency." Alejandro's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with admiration. "Of course," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll do you one better, I'll hire you myself. Consider yourself part of the serving staff for tonight's event." Maria's heart soared, but she tempered her excitement with caution. "And your mother? Won't she object?" A shadow passed over Alejandro's face. "Leave my mother to me. Just be at the mansion at 6 p.m. sharp. I'll make sure everything is arranged." As Maria watched Alejandro walk away, her emotions were in turmoil. She had secured the job she needed, but at what cost? She couldn't shake the feeling that by accepting Alejandro's help, she was stepping into a world far more complicated and dangerous than she had ever imagined. Little did she know that her decision to work at the Castillo Gala would set in motion a chain of events that would unearth long-buried secrets, challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, and ultimately change the course of her life forever. As the sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting a golden glow over the colonial architecture of San Miguel de Allende, Maria stood before the gates of the Castillo mansion, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She had done her best to make herself presentable, wearing her one good dress and pulling her long black hair into a neat bun. In her hands, she clutched a small, battered leather satchel containing a change of clothes for work. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the intercom button. A crackly voice answered, "Yes?" "Who is it?" "Maria Esperanza," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm here for the serving staff position." There was a pause, then the gate swung open with a metallic groan. As Maria walked up the winding driveway, she couldn't help but marvel at the sheer opulence of the Castillo estate. Manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with fountains and statues. The mansion itself was a sprawling Spanish colonial masterpiece, its white walls gleaming in the fading sunlight. At the grand entrance, she was met by a stern-faced housekeeper who introduced herself as Señora Gomez. The older woman's eyes narrowed as she looked Maria up and down, clearly unimpressed. "So, you're the girl Alejandro insisted on hiring," she said, her tone clipped. "Well, don't expect any special treatment. You're here to work, not to socialize with the guests. Follow me." As Señora Gomez led Maria through the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion, she rattled off a list of instructions and rules. Maria's head spun, trying to take it all in. They finally arrived at a small room off the kitchen where other servers were changing into their uniforms. "Get changed quickly," Señora Gomez ordered. "The guests will be arriving soon, and everything must be perfect." As Maria donned the crisp white shirt and black trousers of the serving staff, she couldn't help but overhear the excited chatter of the other workers. "I heard the Castillos have a big announcement to make tonight," one young man whispered. "Really?" replied a girl with curly red hair. "I bet it has something to do with Alejandro. Maybe he's finally getting engaged to that stuck-up Carolina Fuentes." Maria's heart sank at these words, though she chided herself for caring. What did it matter to her if Alejandro was engaged? He was from a different world, a world she could never be part of. As she pinned on her name tag, a commotion in the hallway caught everyone's attention. The door burst open, and there stood Isabella Castillo, resplendent in a shimmering gold gown. Her eyes scanned the room, narrowing when they landed on Maria. "You," she hissed, pointing a bejeweled finger at Maria. "What are you doing here?" Before Maria could respond, Alejandro appeared behind his mother, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Mother, I told you, I hired Maria myself. We were short-staffed, and she has experience." Isabella's face contorted with rage. I won't have this girl serving at our most important event of the year. She'll embarrass us all. That's enough, Isabella. The deep, authoritative voice belonged to Eduardo Castillo, who had appeared in the doorway. His eyes met Maria's briefly, and she was startled by the intensity of his gaze. The girl stays. We need the help, and Alejandro vouches for her skills. Isabella looked as though she wanted to argue further, but something in her husband's tone made her hold her tongue. With a final glare at Maria, she swept out of the room, Alejandro following close behind after shooting Maria an apologetic look. As the other servers bustled about, putting the finishing touches on their uniforms, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than met the eye. The way Eduardo had looked at her, it was almost as if he recognized her. But that was impossible. She had never met the Castillo patriarch before today. Pushing these thoughts aside, Maria focused on the task at hand. She had a job to do, and she was determined to do it well, regardless of Isabella's hostility. As the first guests began to arrive, Maria found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. She moved gracefully through the crowded ballroom, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres with practiced ease. Despite the opulent surroundings and the glittering array of San Miguel de Allende's elite, she remained focused on her duties, determined not to give Isabella any reason to criticize her performance. From the corner of her eye, she caught glimpses of Alejandro, looking dashing in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was surrounded by a group of admirers, including a statuesque blonde woman who seemed to hang on his every word. Maria assumed this must be Carolina Fuentes, the woman the other servers had mentioned. As the evening wore on, Maria found herself near a secluded alcove, refreshing her tray of champagne flutes. Suddenly, she heard hushed voices approaching and instinctively stepped back into the shadows. Eduardo, you can't be serious. It was Isabella's voice, tense and angry. After all these years, you want to throw everything away? Think of the scandal. I'm tired of living with this lie, Isabella, Eduardo replied, his voice weary but determined. It's time the truth came out. We owe it to her, and to Alejandro. Maria's breath caught in her throat. What truth were they talking about? And what did it have to do with Alejandro? Before she could hear more, a hand grasped her arm, making her jump. It was Senora Gomez, her face stern. What are you doing hiding back here, girl? There's work to be done. As Maria hurried back to the ballroom, her mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something important, something that could change everything. The evening reached its climax as Eduardo Castillo took to the small stage set up at one end of the ballroom. The guests fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. Maria, standing near the back of the room with her tray, felt a strange sense of foreboding. Friends, honored guests, Eduardo began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, this annual gala is not just a celebration of our community's success, but also a chance for us to give back to those less fortunate. There was a smattering of polite applause. Eduardo smiled, but Maria noticed that it didn't quite reach his eyes. He seemed nervous. Tonight, however, I have a more personal announcement to make, he continued. One that is long overdue. Isabella, standing at the front of the crowd, suddenly stiffened. Alejandro, by her side, looked confused. Eduardo took a deep breath. 25 years ago, I made a terrible mistake. A mistake born of fear and a misguided sense of duty to my family name. Tonight, I intend to rectify that mistake. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maria found herself holding her breath, though she couldn't have explained why. Alejandro, Eduardo said, his voice thick with emotion, there's something you need to know. Something about your past, and about your true heritage. Alejandro stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. "Father, what are you talking about?" Eduardo's eyes scanned the room, as if searching for something or someone. Suddenly, his gaze locked onto Maria, standing frozen at the back of the ballroom. In that moment, a jolt of recognition passed between them, and Maria felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. "The truth is," Eduardo said, his voice ringing out clearly, "you have a sister, Alejandro. A twin sister, separated from us at birth." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Isabella let out a strangled cry, her face pale with shock and fury. Alejandro stumbled back as if physically struck. But Maria barely registered any of this. Her world had narrowed to a single point, Eduardo's unwavering gaze, fixed upon her with a mixture of regret, hope, and unmistakable recognition. In that moment, as the foundations of her world crumbled around her, Maria Esperanza realized that her life would never be the same again. The humble girl from the marketplace was about to be thrust into a world of wealth, power, and long-buried secrets, a world she had never imagined could be hers. As the shocked murmurs of the crowd grew to a crescendo, Maria's tray of champagne slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound of breaking glass seemed to snap her out of her trance, and she did the only thing she could think of: she ran. Pushing past bewildered guests and fellow servers, Maria fled the ballroom, her heart pounding in her ears. She had no destination in mind, she only knew she had to get away, to find some quiet place where she could make sense of the earth-shattering revelation that had just turned her world upside down. Her feet carried her through winding corridors and out into the expansive gardens of the Castillo estate. The cool night air hit her flushed face, and she gulped it down greedily, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Could it be true? Was she really Alejandro's twin sister? The long-lost daughter of one of the wealthiest families in San Miguel de Allende? As she stumbled to a stop near an ornate fountain, the sound of running water providing a soothing backdrop to her tumultuous emotions, Maria heard footsteps approaching rapidly from behind. She turned, half expecting to see Señora Gomez coming to berate her for abandoning her duties. Instead, she found herself face to face with Alejandro, his green eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like hope. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, as if seeing one another for the first time. The resemblance that Maria had dismissed before now seemed glaringly obvious: the same high cheekbones, the same curve of the jaw, even the same tiny mole just below their left ears. "Is it true?" Alejandro finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you really my sister?" Maria shook her head, not in denial but in bewilderment. I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never knew my mother. My father, Rafael, he always told me she died in childbirth. I never questioned it." Alejandro took a step closer, his expression softening. "I always felt like something was missing," he said quietly. "Like there was a part of me that wasn't complete. When I first saw you in the marketplace, I felt a connection I couldn't explain. Now it all makes sense." Before Maria could respond, more footsteps approached. Eduardo Castillo emerged from the shadows, his face etched with lines of worry and regret. Behind him, Isabella followed, her earlier fury now replaced by a look of resigned defeat. "Maria," Eduardo said gently, "I owe you an explanation. You both deserve to know the truth." Over the next hour, as the sounds of the neglected gala faded into the background, Eduardo unraveled a tale of love, fear, and heart-wrenching choices. He spoke of falling in love with a beautiful but poor young woman named Rosalinda, of the twins born in secret, and of the impossible decision to separate them to protect the Castillo family's reputation and business interests. "Your mother, our dear Rosalinda, she fought against it with every fiber of her being," Eduardo said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was a coward, too concerned with what society would think. I convinced her it was for the best, that at least one of our children could have a life free from the scrutiny and expectations that come with the Castillo name. Isabella, who had remained silent throughout Eduardo's confession, finally spoke up. I agreed to raise Alejandro as my own, she said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting our family's legacy. But the guilt, it ate away at me over the years. I became bitter, angry. I took it out on those I saw as beneath us, never realizing that I was lashing out at the very people who reminded me of the daughter we gave away. Maria listened to their story with a growing sense of unreality. Part of her wanted to reject it all, to run back to the simple life she had always known. But another part, a part that had always felt somehow incomplete, knew in her heart that it was true. What happened to my mother, to Rosalinda? She asked, dreading the answer. Eduardo's face crumpled with grief. She never recovered from losing you, he said softly. She fell into a deep depression. When she died a few years later, I convinced myself it was better this way, that you were better off not knowing the truth. I see now how wrong I was. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the gentle splashing of the fountain. Maria's mind whirled with implications. Her entire life had been built on a lie, yet the truth was almost too fantastic to believe. Alejandro was the first to move. He stepped forward and, without hesitation, pulled Maria into a tight embrace. I've always wanted a sister, he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. As Maria hesitantly returned the hug, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of a brother's arms around her, she caught sight of Isabella over Alejandro's shoulder. The older woman's face was a study in conflicting emotions, shame, regret, and a flicker of something that might have been hope. Eduardo moved to join his children, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. I know this is a lot to take in, he said gently. And I know that no amount of apology can make up for the years we've lost. But if you'll allow it, Maria, I'd like the chance to get to know my daughter. Maria pulled back slightly, looking from Eduardo to Alejandro to Isabella. Her world had been turned upside down in the span of a single evening. The family she had always longed for was suddenly within reach, yet she couldn't help but think of Rafael, the man who had raised her with love and sacrifice. I need time, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. This is all so overwhelming. I need to talk to my father, to Rafael. He deserves to know the truth as well. Eduardo nodded, understanding in his eyes. Of course. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. As the group slowly made their way back to the mansion, where the gala was now in a state of confused disarray, Maria felt as though she were walking in a dream. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and difficult conversations. But for the first time in her life, she felt the stirring of possibility, the chance to bridge two worlds and find the place where she truly belonged. Little did she know that this revelation was only the beginning. The days and weeks to come would test her in ways she had never imagined, forcing her to confront long-held beliefs, navigate treacherous social waters, and ultimately decide what family truly means. As she cast one last glance at the Castillo mansion, now alive with the buzz of the evening's shocking revelations, Maria squared her shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same quiet strength and dignity that had carried her through a life of hardship. For in her heart, she was still Maria Esperanza, a humble woman with an extraordinary destiny. The early morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the sleeping town of San Miguel de Allende. But for Maria Esperanza, sleep had been elusive. She sat on the worn steps of her modest home, her dark eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of the Castillo mansion, barely visible in the dawn light. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind like a surreal dream. With a deep sigh, Maria stood, squaring her shoulders. She had a difficult conversation ahead, one that couldn't be postponed any longer. Stepping back into the small house, she found her father, Raphael, already awake, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with a cup of steaming coffee. "Papa," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." Raphael looked up, concern etching deep lines in his weathered face. "What is it, mi hija? Did something happen at the Castillo Gala?" Maria took a deep breath and began to recount the extraordinary events of the previous night. As she spoke, she watched a myriad of emotions flicker across Raphael's face: surprise, disbelief, and finally, a profound sadness that made her heart ache. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the small kitchen. Raphael's hands, clasped around his coffee mug, trembled slightly. "I always feared this day might come," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria's eyes widened in shock. You knew?" Raphael nodded slowly. "Not everything. But I knew you weren't truly mine by birth." He reached out, taking Maria's hand in his. 25 years ago, a woman came to me in the dead of night. She was beautiful, but her eyes, they were filled with such pain, such desperation. She carried a tiny baby, you. She begged me to take you, to raise you as my own, to keep you safe and loved. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. "But why? Why would she give me up?" "She didn't say much," Raphael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Only that it was to protect you, and that one day, the truth would come out. She made me promise to love you as my own, to never let you feel unwanted or alone." A sad smile touched his lips. "It was the easiest promise I've ever made." Maria felt as though her heart might burst. All these years, this humble, kind man had raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her, knowing all along that she wasn't truly his. "Papa," she choked out, "you are my father. In every way that matters. Nothing will ever change that." Raphael pulled her into a tight embrace, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You have always been my greatest blessing, Maria. No matter what happens, no matter what you choose, you will always be my daughter." As they held each other, both crying and laughing through their tears, neither noticed the sleek black car that pulled up outside their modest home. It wasn't until a sharp knock sounded at the door that they broke apart, startled. Maria opened the door to find Alejandro standing there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, his green eyes, so like her own, she now realized, filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I couldn't sleep. I hoped we could talk." Raphael appeared behind Maria, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Perhaps it's time for you two to get to know each other," he said gently. "Go, mi hija. I'll be here when you return." With a grateful smile and a quick hug for Raphael, Maria stepped out into the bright morning sun with Alejandro. As they walked together through the waking streets of San Miguel de Allende, an awkward silence stretched between them. "I'm sorry for just showing up like this," Alejandro said finally. "It's just... I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing. And now that I know about you, I can't bear the thought of wasting another moment." Maria nodded, understanding all too well the sense of incompleteness he described. "It's all so overwhelming," she admitted. "Yesterday, I was just Maria Esperanza, the weaver's daughter. And now you're Maria Castillo," Alejandro finished for her, a hint of a smile on his lips. The sound of her new name, her true name, sent a shiver down Maria's spine. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," she said softly. "The Castillo world, it's so different from everything I've known." Alejandro's face grew serious. "I won't lie to you, Maria. Our world can be cruel, full of expectations and judgments. But it can also be a force for good, if used the right way." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I've always felt out of place in that world. Too idealistic, too concerned with those less fortunate. But with you by my side, maybe we could change things. Make a real difference. As they talked, Maria began to see a side of Alejandro she had never imagined existed beneath his polished exterior. He spoke passionately about his dreams of using the Castillo wealth and influence to improve life for the poor in San Miguel de Allende, of breaking down the barriers between the social classes. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a familiar figure, Carolina Fuentes, the beautiful socialite Maria had seen clinging to Alejandro's arm at the gala. Her perfectly made-up face was contorted with fury as she stormed towards them. "So it's true." Carolina spat, her eyes flashing dangerously. The great Alejandro Castillo, slumming it with his long-lost pauper sister. She turned her venomous gaze on Maria. "Don't think for a moment that you belong in our world, you little nobody. Blood or no blood, you'll always be nothing more than a servant pretending to be a princess." Before Maria could respond, Alejandro stepped between them, his voice cold with anger. "That's enough, Carolina. Maria is my sister and a Castillo. She has more grace and kindness in her little finger than you have in your entire body." Carolina's face flushed an ugly red. "You'll regret this, Alejandro," she hissed. "Both of you will." With a final glare, she spun on her heel and stalked away, leaving a wake of whispers and stares from the gathering crowd of onlookers. Maria felt her cheeks burning with a mixture of shame and anger. "Perhaps she's right," she said quietly. "Maybe I don't belong in your world." Alejandro turned to her, his eyes fierce with determination. "Don't you see, Maria? You're exactly what our world needs. Your humility, your compassion, these are the qualities that can change everything." He took her hands in his. "I know it won't be easy. But please, give us a chance. Give our family a chance." As Maria looked into her brother's pleading eyes, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of her longed to embrace this new life, this chance at family and belonging she had always dreamed of. But another part clung fiercely to the simple, honest life she had always known, and to the man who had raised her with such love and sacrifice. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to process all of this, to figure out who I really am and where I belong." Alejandro nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But know this, whatever you decide, you'll always have a brother who loves you." As they made their way back to Maria's modest home, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from a nearby alley. Isabella Castillo's eyes narrowed as she observed the growing bond between her two children. Her carefully ordered world was crumbling around her, and she was determined to do whatever it took to maintain her grip on the Castillo legacy, even if it meant destroying the very family she had fought so hard to protect. Back at the Castillo mansion, Eduardo paced his study, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He had spent 25 years trying to bury the past, to ignore the gnawing guilt that had eaten away at his soul. Now that the truth was out, he was determined to make things right, not just for Maria, but for the memory of his beloved Rosalinda. As he gazed out the window at the sun-drenched streets of San Miguel de Allende, Eduardo made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to bring Maria into the fold, to give her the life and opportunities she deserved. But little did he know that forces were already aligning against him, forces that would stop at nothing to keep the Castillo family's darkest secrets buried. In the days that followed, Maria found herself caught between two worlds. By day, she continued her simple life, weaving blankets, helping her father in their small shop, exchanging friendly greetings with neighbors who had known her all her life. But in the evenings, she would often find Alejandro waiting for her, eager to share more about the Castillo world and the opportunities that awaited her. One balmy evening, as they strolled through a fragrant garden on the outskirts of town, Alejandro broached a subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Maria," he began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. The annual Castillo Foundation Charity Ball is coming up in a few weeks. It's our biggest event of the year, all the most influential people in Mexico attend. He paused, gauging her reaction. I think it would be the perfect opportunity to introduce you to society as a Castillo. Maria felt a jolt of panic at the thought. Alejandro, I don't know, she said, shaking her head. I'm not ready for that kind of attention. I wouldn't know how to act, what to say. Alejandro took her hands in his eyes earnest. You don't have to pretend to be anyone other than who you are, Maria. Your kindness, your genuine spirit, these are the qualities that will win people over. And think of the good we could do. With you by my side, we could raise more money for charity than ever before. As Maria wavered, torn between her fear and the desire to make a difference, neither of them noticed the figure lurking in the shadows nearby. Carolina Fuentes' eyes glittered with malice as she eavesdropped on their conversation, her mind already spinning with plots and schemes. Meanwhile, across town in a dimly lit bar, Isabella Castillo sat nursing a glass of expensive whiskey. Her carefully cultivated facade of control had cracked, revealing the desperate, fearful woman beneath. As she raised the glass to her lips with a trembling hand, a smooth voice interrupted her brooding. Well. The great Isabella Castillo, drowning her sorrows in a common bar. How the mighty have fallen. Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the speaker. Victor Mendoza, she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. What rock did you crawl out from under? Victor, a handsome man in his 50s with a dangerous glint in his eye, slid into the seat across from her. Now, Isabella. Is that any way to greet an old friend? His lips curled into a predatory smile. Especially one who might be able to help you with your little family problem. Isabella's interest was piqued despite herself. What are you talking about? Victor leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I couldn't help but overhear about your husband's little announcement at the gala. A long-lost daughter, suddenly appearing to claim her share of the Castillo fortune? That must be quite inconvenient for you. Isabella's eyes narrowed. Get to the point, Victor. What if I told you I could make your problem disappear? Victor's eyes glittered with malice. For the right price, of course. As Isabella considered Victor's ominous offer, the wheels of fate began to turn. Dark forces were aligning, threatening to tear apart the fragile new bonds forming between Maria and her newfound family. Unaware of the storm brewing around her, Maria lay in bed that night, her mind whirling with thoughts of charity balls, family legacies, and the dizzying possibilities of her new life. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something monumental, a choice that would not only define her future but potentially change the lives of countless others. Little did she know that her greatest challenges, and her true destiny, still lay ahead. The humble woman from the marketplace was about to be thrust into a world of glittering ballrooms, dark secrets, and life-altering choices. And in the crucible of these trials, the true strength of Maria Esperanza Castillo would finally be revealed. As the moon rose high over San Miguel de Allende, casting long shadows across the sleeping town, the stage was set for a drama that would test the bonds of family, the power of love, and the unbreakable spirit of a woman caught between two worlds. The days leading up to the Castillo Foundation Charity Ball were a whirlwind of activity for Maria. Despite her initial reservations, she had agreed to Alejandro's proposal to introduce her to society. Now, she found herself caught in a dizzying world of fittings, etiquette lessons, and crash courses in the intricacies of high society. One particularly trying afternoon, Maria stood in the opulent dressing room of San Miguel de Allende's most exclusive boutique, surrounded by a sea of glittering gowns. Isabella Castillo circled her like a shark, her critical gaze taking in every detail. No, Isabella snapped, dismissing yet another dress with a wave of her perfectly manicured hand. Nothing off the rack will do. We'll have something custom made. After all, you're a Castillo now. Her voice dripped with a mixture of resignation and barely concealed disdain. Maria caught sight of herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Gone was the simple weaver's daughter. In her place stood a polished, if uncomfortable, vision of high society. Señora Castillo, she began hesitantly, I appreciate all of this, but I'm not sure. Isabella, the older woman interrupted sharply. You might as well call me Isabella. Or mother, I suppose, though I doubt either of us is ready for that. A flicker of something, regret? Fear, passed across her face before her icy mask slipped back into place. Before Maria could respond, the boutique's door chimed, and Alejandro strode in, his face lighting up at the sight of his sister. Maria! You look incredible! His enthusiasm faltered as he noticed the tension in the room. Is everything all right? Isabella forced a tight smile. Everything's fine, darling. We're just having a little bonding time. Alejandro's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could press the issue, another figure appeared in the doorway, Carolina Fuentes, looking as though she had just swallowed something sour. Well, Carolina drawled, her eyes raking over Maria with undisguised contempt. If it isn't Cinderella, getting ready for the ball. Tell me, Maria, do you think a fancy dress will be enough to make people forget where you really came from? Maria felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of shame and anger, but before she could retort, Alejandro stepped between them. That's enough, Carolina, he said, his voice cold. I thought I made it clear that you're no longer welcome in our lives. Carolina's eyes flashed dangerously. Oh, Alejandro. You'll come to your senses eventually. And when you do... She let the threat hang in the air as she sauntered out of the boutique. In the tense silence that followed, Maria made a decision. I think I've had enough for today, she said quietly. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. Before anyone could stop her, Maria hurried out of the boutique and into the bustling streets of San Miguel de Allende. She walked aimlessly, her mind whirling with doubts and fears. Had she made a mistake in agreeing to enter this glittering, treacherous world? Lost in thought, she didn't notice the sleek black car pulling up beside her until a familiar voice called out. Maria? Are you all right? She turned to see Eduardo Castillo leaning out of the car window, concern etched on his distinguished face. I'm not sure, she admitted. Eduardo's expression softened. Come, let me give you a ride. I think it's time we had a proper talk, just the two of us. Hesitantly, Maria climbed into the car. As they drove through the winding streets, Eduardo began to speak, his voice heavy with emotion. I owe you so much more than an apology, Maria, he said softly. What I did, separating you from your brother, denying you your birthright, it's unforgivable. But I want you to know the whole truth. Over the next hour, as they drove to a secluded overlook with a breathtaking view of the town, Eduardo poured out the full story of his relationship with Rosalinda, Maria's mother. He spoke of their passionate love affair, the pressure from his family to end things, and the heart-wrenching decision to give Maria up. Your mother, she was the strongest person I've ever known, Eduardo said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. She fought so hard to keep you both. In the end, it was my cowardice that tore our family apart. Maria listened in stunned silence, her heart aching for the mother she'd never known and the father who'd carried this burden for so long. Why are you telling me all this now? She asked finally. Eduardo turned to her, his face etched with determination. Because you deserve to know everything before you decide whether to fully embrace life as a Castillo. This world, our world, it can be beautiful, but it can also be cruel. I want you to enter it with your eyes wide open. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. For the first time since the revelation of her true identity, she felt like she was beginning to understand her place in this new world. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching out to squeeze Eduardo's hand. "For your honesty, and for giving me the choice." Eduardo smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Whatever you decide, Maria, know that I am so proud to call you my daughter." As they drove back into town, neither of them noticed the mysterious figure watching from a nearby hilltop, a camera with a long-range lens capturing their every move. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office across town, Victor Mendoza hunched over his computer, a sinister smile playing on his lips as he scrolled through a series of incriminating documents. "Oh, Isabella," he murmured to himself, "you have no idea what's coming." The night of the Castillo Foundation charity ball arrived in a flurry of excitement and trepidation. The grand ballroom of the Castillo mansion glittered with thousands of twinkling lights, the air filled with the soft strains of a string quartet and the murmur of San Miguel de Allende's elite. Maria stood just outside the massive oak doors, her heart pounding. She wore a stunning gown of deep emerald green, custom-made to accentuate her natural beauty. Her long black hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and around her neck hung a delicate diamond pendant, a gift from Eduardo. "Are you ready?" Alejandro appeared at her side, looking dashing in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. Maria took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "As I'll ever be." As the doors swung open and the siblings entered arm in arm, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to the stunning young woman who bore such a striking resemblance to Alejandro Castillo. Eduardo stepped forward, pride evident in every line of his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing out across the ballroom, "it is my great pleasure to introduce you to my daughter, Maria Esperanza Castillo." The room erupted in a mixture of applause and excited whispers. Maria felt as though she might faint under the weight of so many scrutinizing gazes, but Alejandro's steady presence at her side gave her strength. As the evening wore on, Maria found herself swept up in a whirlwind of introductions, small talk, and dancing. To her surprise, she discovered a natural grace and charm that put even the most skeptical guests at ease. Her genuine warmth and compassion shone through, winning over many who had come prepared to snub the Castillo's charity case. But not everyone was charmed by the newcomer. From her place near the bar, Isabella watched the proceedings with a mixture of fear and resentment. The ease with which Maria seemed to be adapting to this world, her world, filled her with a cold dread. "Quite the Cinderella story, isn't it?" Victor Mendoza's smooth voice startled Isabella out of her brooding. The humble weaver's daughter, suddenly thrust into the lap of luxury. One has to wonder how long the fairy tale will last. Isabella's eyes narrowed. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor's smile was shark-like. "Oh, nothing much. Just thought you might be interested in some information I've recently acquired. Information that could change everything for your precious family." Before Isabella could respond, a commotion near the center of the ballroom caught everyone's attention. Carolina Fuentes, clearly intoxicated, had grabbed the microphone from the band. "Ladies and gentlemen," she slurred, her voice dripping with malice, "I hope you're all enjoying the Castillo's little puppet show. But let me tell you the truth about their precious Maria." Alejandro moved to intercept her, but he was too late. Carolina's next words froze everyone in their tracks. "Did you know that our saintly Eduardo Castillo has been secretly meeting with his long-lost daughter? Conspiring behind his wife's back, no doubt. I wonder what other secrets they're hiding. What do you say, Maria? Care to share with the class?" The room erupted in shocked gasps and furious whispers. Maria felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her feet. She looked desperately at Alejandro, then at Eduardo, whose face had gone ashen. But it was Isabella who sprang into action. With a grace born of years navigating social disasters, she glided to the center of the room and took the microphone from Carolina's unresistant hands. "My dear friends," Isabella began, her voice steady and clear, "I must apologize for this unfortunate interruption. It seems our guest has had a bit too much champagne." She paused, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Maria. In that moment, something passed between the two women, an understanding, perhaps even the faintest glimmer of respect. "What my husband has failed to mention," Isabella continued, "is that these private meetings were at my request. You see, I wanted to get to know my stepdaughter away from the public eye, to welcome her properly into our family before introducing her to society." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Crisis averted, the party slowly returned to its jovial atmosphere. But for Maria, everything had changed. As she locked eyes with Isabella across the crowded ballroom, she realized that the game had shifted. The battle lines were being redrawn, and she was no longer sure who her true allies, or enemies, might be. As the night wore on, Maria found a moment of respite on a secluded balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of San Miguel de Allende. The cool night air was a balm to her frayed nerves. "Quite a performance in there," a voice said from the shadows. Maria turned to see Victor Mendoza step into the light, a knowing smirk on his face. "You're adapting to this world faster than anyone expected. But tell me, Maria, are you prepared for what comes next?" Maria's eyes narrowed. "Who are you? What do you want?" Victor's smile widened. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows all the skeletons in the Castillo closet. And believe me, my dear, there are many." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Your story is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're smart, you'll start asking questions. The right questions." Before Maria could respond, Victor melted back into the shadows, leaving her with a growing sense of unease. As she turned back to the glittering party inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just been given a warning, or perhaps a challenge. Little did Maria know that this night, with all its triumphs and revelations, was merely the opening salvo in a battle that would test her courage, her loyalty, and her very identity. The humble woman from the marketplace was about to be thrust into a web of secrets, lies, and long-buried truths that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew. As the charity ball wound down and the last of the guests departed, Maria stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking out over the now empty ballroom. In just a few short weeks, her world had been turned upside down. She was no longer simply Maria Esperanza, the weaver's daughter. She was Maria Castillo, heiress to one of the most powerful families in Mexico. But as she gazed at her reflection in a nearby mirror, she made a silent vow. No matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what secrets were yet to be uncovered, she would never forget where she came from. The humble, compassionate spirit that had defined her for 25 years would be her compass in this new, glittering, treacherous world. With a deep breath, Maria descended the stairs, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The true test of her strength, her values, and her newfound family ties was only just beginning. In the weeks following the Castillo Foundation charity ball, Maria found herself navigating an increasingly complex web of relationships, expectations, and hidden agendas. The glittering world of San Miguel de Allende's elite had welcomed her with open arms, at least on the surface. But beneath the polite smiles and air kisses, Maria could sense undercurrents of suspicion, jealousy, and in some cases, outright hostility. One sunny afternoon, Maria sat in the lush gardens of the Castillo estate, attempting to read a book on business management that Alejandro had given her. "If you're going to be part of the family business, you need to understand how it works," he had said with an encouraging smile. But the words swam before her eyes, her mind too preoccupied with the events of the past few weeks to focus. "Peso for your thoughts," a familiar voice interrupted her reverie. Maria looked up to see Eduardo approaching, a gentle smile on his face. "Papa," she said, the words still feeling strange on her tongue. I didn't hear you coming. Eduardo sat beside her on the ornate stone bench. You seemed lost in thought. Is everything all right, Mija? Maria hesitated, unsure how to voice the myriad concerns swirling in her mind. It's just, all of this, she gestured vaguely at their opulent surroundings. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's life. Like at any moment, someone's going to realize I don't belong here and send me back to my old life. Eduardo's face softened with understanding. Maria, you belong here as much as anyone. You're a Castillo, through and through. But more importantly, you're you, kind, compassionate, and stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you doubt your place here. As father and daughter shared a moment of connection, neither noticed the figure watching them from a second-story window. Isabella's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as she observed the growing bond between Eduardo and the daughter he had given up so long ago. Just then, a discreet cough interrupted the scene. Señora Gomez, the Castillo's longtime housekeeper, approached with a silver tray bearing an envelope. Excuse me, Señor Castillo, but this just arrived for Señorita Maria. It's marked urgent. Maria took the envelope with a puzzled frown. Who would be sending her urgent messages? As she tore it open, her eyes widened in shock. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy image of a woman who could have been Maria's twin, only older. Scrawled on the back were the words, "The truth isn't buried as deep as they think. Rosalinda lives." Maria? What is it? Eduardo's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. Maria looked up at him, her mind reeling. I think it's a picture of my mother. And according to this, she might still be alive. Eduardo's face drained of color. That's impossible, he whispered, his voice shaking. Rosalinda died years ago. I saw her. I was at her funeral. Before Maria could respond, another voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? Isabella descended the garden steps, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene before her. Maria hesitated, but something in Eduardo's stunned expression made her decide to be honest. She held out the photograph. Someone sent me this. They're claiming that my mother, that Rosalinda, might still be alive. Isabella snatched the photo, her face contorting with a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like fear. This is preposterous, she snapped. Obviously someone's idea of a cruel joke. Eduardo, we should contact the police immediately. But Eduardo seemed lost in his own world, his eyes fixed on the photograph of the woman he had loved and lost. It can't be, he murmured. And yet, Maria's mind was spinning. Could it be true? Could her mother really be alive after all these years? And if so, why had she stayed hidden? Why let her daughter and the man she loved believe she was dead? As the Castillo family grappled with this shocking development, across town in a dingy bar, Victor Mendoza sat nursing a glass of whiskey, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Everything was going according to plan. Soon, the carefully constructed facade of the Castillo empire would come crumbling down, and he would be there to pick up the pieces. Little did Victor know that his schemes were about to intersect with forces beyond his control. For at that very moment, a mysterious woman was checking into San Miguel de Allende's most exclusive hotel. Her face was hidden beneath large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, but those who looked closely might have noticed a striking resemblance to the Castillo family's newest member. As night fell over the town, Maria found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with questions and possibilities. She slipped out of her room and made her way to Eduardo's study, determined to find answers. But as she approached the heavy oak door, she heard raised voices from within. We have to tell her the truth, Isabella. Eduardo's voice was filled with anguish. If Rosalinda is really alive, Don't be a fool, Eduardo, Isabella hissed. If this gets out, we'll lose everything. The company, our reputation, everything we've worked for. And what about our daughter? Eduardo shot back. Doesn't she deserve to know the truth about her mother? There was a heavy silence, then Isabella's voice, low and dangerous. Need I remind you of the sacrifices we've made to keep this family's secrets buried? If Rosalinda is alive, it's because she chose to stay away. To protect Maria, and to protect us all. Maria stumbled back from the door, her heart pounding. What secrets could be so terrible that they would justify keeping her separated from her mother all these years? And what did Isabella mean by sacrifices? As she turned to flee back to her room, Maria collided with a solid figure in the darkened hallway. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into Alejandro's concerned face. Maria? What are you doing out here so late? She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain what she had just overheard? How could she reconcile the loving father and brother she had come to know with the web of secrets and lies that seemed to entangle the entire Castillo family? Alejandro's expression softened as he took in her distress. Come on, he said gently, guiding her towards the kitchen. Let's get some tea, and you can tell me what's bothering you. As the siblings sat at the kitchen island, steaming mugs of chamomile tea before them, Maria found herself pouring out everything: the mysterious photograph, the overheard conversation, her growing suspicions that there was far more to her family's history than anyone was willing to admit. Alejandro listened in stunned silence, his face growing more troubled with each revelation. When Maria finally finished, he reached out and took her hand. Maria, I swear to you, I knew nothing about any of this. But I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of it together. Whatever secrets our family is hiding, we'll uncover them. As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, Maria and Alejandro made a pact. They would work together to unravel the mystery surrounding their mother's disappearance and the secrets that had torn their family apart. But they would have to tread carefully. It was clear that powerful forces were at work to keep the truth buried. Little did they know that their quest for answers would lead them down a dangerous path, one that would test their newfound sibling bond and force them to confront painful truths about their family, their heritage, and themselves. As Maria finally crawled back into bed, exhausted but determined, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. The humble weaver's daughter who had entered the Castillo world just weeks ago was gone. In her place stood a young woman ready to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. Across town, in her luxurious hotel suite, the mysterious woman removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were achingly familiar, the same eyes that stared back at Maria from the mirror every day. Rosalinda Castillo, long thought dead, gazed out at the sleeping town of San Miguel de Allende, her heart heavy with the weight of long-buried secrets and the ache of years lost. Soon, my darling, she whispered to the night. Soon, we'll be together again. And this time, nothing will tear us apart. As a new day dawned over San Miguel de Allende, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the Castillo family and the entire town to its very core. The truth, so long buried, was clawing its way to the surface, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, Maria and Alejandro embarked on a covert investigation, carefully probing the edges of their family's secrets. They combed through old newspaper archives, quietly questioned longtime family employees, and even made a clandestine visit to the town's records office. Their search led them to a startling discovery. 25 years ago, shortly before Maria's birth, the Castillo Enterprises had been on the brink of bankruptcy. The company's miraculous turnaround coincided suspiciously with Eduardo's sudden marriage to Isabella and the mysterious death of Rosalinda. It doesn't make sense, Alejandro muttered as they pored over financial records late one night in his office. How did the company recover so quickly? And why would our mother fake her own death right when things were looking up? Maria shook her head, frustration etched on her face. There's something we're missing. Some piece of the puzzle that would make all of this make sense. Their quiet investigation didn't go unnoticed. Isabella watched her children with growing suspicion, her carefully maintained facade beginning to crack under the strain. Eduardo, torn between his love for his newly reunited family and the weight of long-held secrets, became increasingly withdrawn and agitated. One evening, as Maria was returning from a charity event, one of the many social obligations she was still struggling to adjust to, she found a note slipped under her bedroom door. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by someone under great stress. The answers you seek lie in the old Castillo summer house. Go there at midnight tomorrow. Come alone. Trust no one. Maria's heart raced as she read and reread the cryptic message. Should she tell Alejandro? Eduardo? But the warning to trust no one gave her pause. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, she made up her mind. Tomorrow night, she would finally get the answers she had been searching for. As midnight approached the following night, Maria slipped out of the mansion, her heart pounding with every step. The old Castillo summer house was located on the outskirts of town, a crumbling relic of the family's past glories that had long since fallen into disuse. As she approached the dilapidated building, a figure emerged from the shadows. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the woman from the photograph, older now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair, but unmistakably her mother. "Mama?" Maria whispered, hardly daring to believe her eyes. Rosalinda's face crumpled with emotion. "Oh, my darling girl," she breathed, pulling Maria into a fierce embrace. "How I've longed for this moment." For several minutes, mother and daughter clung to each other, years of separation and longing pouring out in a flood of tears and half-formed words. But all too soon, Rosalinda pulled back, her face grave. "We don't have much time," she said urgently. "There's so much you need to know, Maria. About your father, about Isabella, about why I had to stay away all these years." But before Rosalinda could continue, a cold voice cut through the night. "Well, isn't this a touching family reunion?" Maria whirled to see Isabella emerging from the darkness, a gun held steadily in her hand. Behind her, Eduardo appeared, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "Rosalinda?" he gasped. "It can't be." Isabella's laugh was bitter and cold. "Oh, but it is, my dear husband. Your lost love, back from the dead. How inconvenient for us all." As the four stood frozen in a tableau of shock and brewing confrontation, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the night. In the distance, flashing lights illuminated the winding road leading to the summer house. Maria's mind raced. Who had called the police? And what would happen now that all the players in this long-buried drama were finally face to face? As Isabella's finger tightened on the trigger and Eduardo moved to intervene, Maria realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. The secrets of the past were about to collide with the realities of the present, and the fate of the entire Castillo family hung in the balance. In that heart-stopping moment, Maria knew that the choice she made next would determine not just her future, but the future of everyone she had come to love in her new life. The humble woman from the marketplace was about to face her greatest test yet, one that would require all her courage, compassion, and newfound strength to overcome. The old Castillo summer house stood silent under the moonlight, a crumbling witness to the drama unfolding within its walls. Time seemed to stand still as Isabella's finger hovered over the trigger, her eyes wild with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Isabella, please," Eduardo's voice was low and pleading. "Put the gun down. We can talk about this." Isabella's laugh was hollow. "Talk? Now you want to talk, Eduardo? After 25 years of lies and secrets?" Maria's mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene before her. Her newfound mother, Rosalinda, stood protectively in front of her, while the woman who had reluctantly accepted her into the Castillo family now threatened them all with a gun. And caught in the middle was Eduardo, the father she had just begun to know and love. "What is going on?" Maria finally found her voice. "Please, someone tell me the truth. All of it." There was a moment of heavy silence, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Isabella who spoke. "The truth," she said, her voice bitter. "The truth is that your precious father and mother were going to destroy everything the Castillo family had built. All for love." She spat the last word as if it were poison. Rosalinda stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "That's not true, and you know it, Isabella. We were trying to save the company, to make it ethical." "Ethical?" Isabella scoffed. "There's no room for ethics in business. Your foolish ideals would have bankrupted us all." As the two women faced off, Eduardo moved slowly towards Maria. "I'm so sorry, Mija," he said softly. "We never meant for any of this to happen." Suddenly, the doors burst open, and Alejandro rushed in, followed closely by Victor Mendoza. "Stop!" Alejandro shouted, taking in the scene with horror. Victor's eyes gleamed with a predatory light. Well, he drawled. "Isn't this cozy? The whole Castillo clan, together at last. And with so many juicy secrets about to spill out." Isabella whirled, her gun now trained on Victor. "You," she hissed. "You're behind all this, aren't you?" Victor spread his hands in a gesture of mock innocence. "I merely provided the spark, my dear Isabella. The powder keg was already here, just waiting to explode." As tensions in the room reached a boiling point, Maria suddenly found a calm clarity descending over her. With a deep breath, she stepped into the center of the room, her voice ringing out with unexpected authority. "Enough," she said firmly. "No more secrets. No more lies. It's time for the whole truth to come out, right here, right now." To everyone's surprise, Isabella slowly lowered the gun, her shoulders sagging with the weight of years of deception. "She's right," she said quietly. "It's time." Over the next hour, as the police waited outside, thanks to a quick call from Alejandro explaining the delicate family matter, the full story finally emerged. 25 years ago, Eduardo and Rosalinda had indeed discovered irregularities in the Castillo company's finances. Unethical practices, exploitative labor conditions, and even ties to criminal organizations had brought the once proud family business to the brink of ruin. Determined to save the company and redeem the Castillo name, the young lovers had planned to clean house, even if it meant temporary financial hardship. But Isabella, then the company's ambitious CFO, had other ideas. "I couldn't let them destroy everything we built," Isabella explained, her voice hollow. "So I made a deal with some powerful people. People who could make our problems disappear. The same people who insisted that Rosalinda had to disappear too," Eduardo added, his face lined with years of guilt and regret. Rosalinda picked up the thread of the story, explaining how she had agreed to fake her own death to protect her unborn child and the man she loved. "They threatened to kill you both if I didn't cooperate," she said, her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Maria and Eduardo. "And I agreed to marry Isabella, to maintain the illusion of a stable, prosperous family," Eduardo finished. "It was the only way to keep you safe, Maria. But not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted the choice we made." As the full weight of the truth settled over the room, Victor Mendoza let out a low whistle. My, he said, his eyes glittering with malice. "What a delicious scandal. I can see the headlines now, Castillo Empire built on lies and crime. Your reputation will be in tatters." But Maria, who had listened to the whole sordid tale in stunned silence, suddenly straightened her shoulders. "No," she said firmly. "That's not how this story ends." All eyes turned to her as she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The Castillo name doesn't have to be synonymous with lies and greed. We have a chance to make things right, to use our wealth and influence for good." She turned to Eduardo and Rosalinda. "You wanted to make the company ethical 25 years ago. It's not too late to fulfill that dream." Then, to everyone's surprise, she addressed Isabella directly. "And you, Señora Castillo. You've done terrible things, but you did them to protect this family in your own way. Help us make amends. Help us rebuild the Castillo legacy into something we can all be proud of." A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of Maria's words sank in. It was Alejandro who broke it, stepping forward to stand beside his sister. "Maria's right," he said firmly. "This is our chance to rewrite the Castillo story. Together." Slowly, tentatively, the others began to nod. Even Isabella, her face etched with years of bitterness, seemed to soften. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "it's time for a change." As the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, the Castillo family emerged from the old summer house, battered but united for the first time in 25 years. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, public scrutiny, and the monumental task of reforming a company built on shaky ethical grounds. But as Maria looked around at her newfound family, her birth parents, the brother she had grown to love, and even the stern Isabella, she felt a surge of hope. The humble girl from the marketplace had not only found her place in this new world, she had found the strength to change it for the better. In the months and years that followed, the Castillo family worked tirelessly to make amends for the sins of the past. Under Maria and Alejandro's leadership, Castillo Enterprises became a model of corporate responsibility, investing heavily in education, healthcare, and sustainable development throughout Mexico. Rosalinda, finally free to reclaim her identity, threw herself into charitable work, using her own experiences to help other families torn apart by violence and corruption. Eduardo found peace in supporting his children's vision, while Isabella, to everyone's surprise, became a fierce advocate for corporate transparency. As for Victor Mendoza, his attempts to blackmail the family backfired spectacularly. The Castillos, in a show of radical honesty, chose to reveal their own past misdeeds, robbing Victor of his leverage and leading to his eventual downfall. 5 years after that fateful night in the summer house, Maria stood on the balcony of the Castillo mansion, looking out over the town she had grown to love. San Miguel de Allende had flourished under the reformed Castillo family's benevolent influence, its streets bustling with new businesses and its schools filled with bright-eyed children full of hope for the future. Behind her, she heard the sounds of her family gathering for their weekly dinner, Alejandro's booming laugh, Rosalinda's gentle voice, Eduardo's warm chuckle, and even Isabella's dry wit. And beside her stood Rafael, the man who had raised her with love and kindness, now an honored member of the extended Castillo clan. As the sun set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but she had remained true to herself throughout. The humble woman from the marketplace had not only found her place in the world of wealth and privilege, she had transformed it, infusing it with the compassion, integrity, and strength that had always been her true inheritance. With a smile, Maria turned to join her family, ready to face whatever new adventures the future might hold. For she knew now that with love, honesty, and the courage to fight for what's right, even the most unlikely of stories could have a happy ending. As she closed the balcony doors behind her, the last rays of the setting sun illuminated the new Castillo family crest, recently redesigned to reflect their renewed values. Beneath the traditional symbols of wealth and power, a simple weaver's shuttle now held pride of place, a constant reminder of the humble beginnings that had ultimately saved and redeemed them all.